And here we go. So what we wanted to cover today was really a focus on how Google Plus Hangouts can help you in reaching out to your prospects and customers and really communicating the value of the solution. As many of you know, we've been investing tremendously in the Hangouts product and service over the last year or so, and it's really evolving into a very powerful tool for communication and collaboration. And so we want to be able to give you guys some information and some tools to be able to present that value to your end customers. And by the way, this is not only something that's obviously relevant to new accounts and new customers that you're trying to land, but it's also very relevant to your existing Google Apps users. What we're seeing is that the adoption rates have a long way to go in the existing customer base. And of course, the more customers use these tools, the more value they're getting out of their overall Google Apps purchase, the more likely they will be to renew, and the more likely they will be to purchase additional services when those services are available. But again, of course, Hangouts part of the core suite that they're already paying for. We're going to cover a couple of things in this session. I'm going to go through some of the business challenges that Hangouts addresses, and really where some of the value opportunities are that can help you, again, convey that to your end customers and help them see where they can gain the most and target the most in terms of deploying and taking advantage of Hangouts. And we've got a couple of specific customer stories which are sometimes helpful in getting people to sort of see the light. They say, aha, I see someone else that did something, I've got a business challenge similar to that, and I could use Hangouts in a similar way. And then Patrick's going to come on and take you guys through, I think, a very rich set of technical information and sort of change management and how to help your clients prepare for and successfully deploy and take advantage of the Hangouts platform. This is a set of data that really gets to the point that increasingly people are not working in the same location, the same office, the same facility, etc. These stats come from Forrester and Bain across a couple of different studies that they've done. The first one being that almost half of the workers in the U.S. will be not in a central location, i.e. will be considered remote over the next 2 years. And this is a tremendous a tremendous area of importance and value to millennials as they come into the workforce. They're expecting flexible work hours and capabilities, and it's really big in terms of retaining them to your customer organization. So there's just a really significant trend in terms of teams being in different physical locations and really needing tools to support them effectively in getting their tasks done. But as we still see today, remote collaboration is harder than it should be. We all have these devices in our pockets or in our bags. These devices have all of the hardware that you need, but we still see a ton of use of the telephone. People are just naturally inclined to still pick that thing up, do the audio conference calls. And so Hangouts, I think, is a really important bridge service that allows us to really get the full value out of those endpoint devices and by doing so create a very collaborative and effectively communicative environment. Now, of course, video collaboration and video conferencing stuff has been around for a while, but I think the reality of it is it's really not available to even a significant portion of users at your customer organization. So, the Ciscos, the Polycoms of the world, about 5% of the organizations have those implementations, and much smaller percentage of the end users in those organizations actually get access to them. Because of their cost, it's a very exclusive, and frankly, it's a very complex technology, right? Most of these things are only accessed by the senior level leaders of an organization with essentially white glove IT support to make it run smoothly. So with Hangouts, we can really engage the other 95%. And this is a really big, I think, notion and concept to take as you position Hangouts to your end customers. Make sure that your end customers are not thinking about, oh, I can replace my Cisco or my Polycom with a lower cost alternative. While they certainly can do that, and I think they will get a cost benefit out of that, that's an example of what we would call an incremental change. But as many of you know, we like to think about 10x change. And the notion of pushing video out to every user in the organization, every corner of the organization, every place that an employee may be, that's the 10x benefit of the Hangouts technology. So being able to engage everyone on this rich collaborative video interaction platform is really, really powerful. As we start to look at where we can break down the opportunities for value, we've identified these three groupings around meetings and making that whole process more efficient and more effective, around tapping into the experts within a customer's organization and allowing them to scale that expertise, again, without friction from geographic distance or time zone distance or any of that stuff. And then ultimately, as a platform to reach different customers, and these could be internal customers or external customers, and we'll walk through each of these. So my original title for this slide was "Meetings Suck," but our marketing and PR people decided that was a little too harsh. So we changed it to, you know, who really loves our standing meetings? We obviously have a bunch of these standing meetings, but what we've seen in a lot of organizations, and I think this is probably true for a lot of your customer organizations, is that we've got too many standing meetings where analysis and decisions can often take longer than we'd like them to, in part because there's often this sort of have the meeting, send out the notes and action items, you know, collect everybody's comments on those things, and iterate through that process. Whereas, as many of you know from your engagement with our products, you can really short-circuit all of that and accelerate everything through a combination of Hangouts and say, Google Docs, for example. Again, this notion that many teams have members that are not physically in the same location, and that the technology today kind of gets in the way. I mean, we think of the audio conference call as being a good way to do things, but if you take a step back and think, instead of having to type in, you know, 75 digits to start the conference call and then have these sort of faceless voices on the other end, isn't the notion of just clicking once on a screen and being able to see the people that you're working with much more compelling? And so there's lots of examples of meetings, right? Marketing teams have agency reviews. Internally, you may coordinate on a new product or service launch. You may have different facilities where you want to, you know, sort of get that facility on the same page as the strategy from headquarters, and so a site huddle is an example of that. I really think we at Google have seen a significant impact and I think efficiency gain in the way we run our meetings as this Hangout platform has really pervaded everything that we do. And hopefully you guys in the partner organization are also starting to see some of that. But it definitely takes time to get to that adoption level where the tipping point occurs and all of a sudden things are really accelerating dramatically. So here's an example of how to supercharge meetings that comes from Travis Perkins. They're a retailer, and obviously retailers are dealing with very rapid product introduction cycles, and they're very challenged to make sure that their associates are up to speed on the new products, can position and sell them effectively. And so in the past, as they get a new product line coming on into the stores, you know, they do a traditional thing where they'd set up meetings to discuss the new strategy that they've documented. They'd email that document as an attachment. Everybody would provide their feedback on the attachment when they'd send it back to us, it after the meeting and send it back out. And the whole thing would take, you know, weeks to complete. And now what they've been able to do with Hangouts, again, is sort of short-circuit all of that. Conducting a Hangout where everybody is discussing, giving all their feedback, resolving all their questions in a sort of interactive live ad hoc session, either scheduled or ad hoc, I should say, using a Google Doc that everyone's collaborating on as an underpinning of the Hangout. And because it's that single source of truth, arriving at conclusion and being able to roll that out much more effectively. And so the simplicity of access to that collaborative environment has increased the participation of the people that are defining and setting the strategy. And of course, they're able to roll this out with significantly less travel, and specifically over 1,400 fewer trips that are necessary each year to the different locations to roll the strategy out. The next example comes from our friends up in Canada, the CBC, the largest Canadian broadcasting service, who were the national provider in Canada for the Sochi Olympics. And what you didn't see if you watched any of the Olympics on their channels was that behind the scenes, Hangouts was really playing a big role in coordinating their production activities. So in the past, of course, they would set up these audio bridges, and they would have a ton of one-line emails, texts, and calls, and there'd be a lot of sort of frenetic action in the control room. And it was, I think, an environment that was very stressful, and everybody felt, didn't necessarily produce the best broadcast that they could have. But when they started using Hangouts this time around, they were able to do a daily Hangout and make sure everyone was up to date with last night's results. They were able to keep the teams synchronized. So in Toronto is where CBC has their sort of main broadcast facilities and control room. They had a facility at the International Broadcast Center in Sochi, and then they also had remote equipment sites out at the different venues. And so being able to coordinate all of that with a combination of Hangouts on a daily basis, as well as, again, Google Docs kind of underneath, making sure that all of the current results were available to the on-air talent, really helped them produce the Olympics at a level that they had never been able to do before. And in particular, we were meeting with them a couple of weeks ago, and they took us on a tour of the broadcast room, and they said one of the most, I think, significant, memorable aspects of this production of the Olympics for them was that the control room was very quiet compared to previous broadcasts. So instead of all these audio conference calls and people sort of shouting at each other, across the room and on the telephone and whatnot, everybody was engaging in these dialogues through Hangouts, through the scheduled as well as the ad hoc video meetings, and obviously lots of instant message communication going on. So, we like to say, at least in Canada, the Olympics were helped produced by Hangouts. Another area that I think is a huge opportunity for value around Hangouts is remote expertise, right? Getting the right people in the right place can be very challenging and expensive, and frankly, is limited in its ability to scale. And so whether that, might be training teams that operate machinery or otherwise need safety training for compliance purposes, whether or not they're in the field doing any sort of troubleshooting or documentation of field conditions, or for another example is, making sure your sales team is up to speed, and perhaps you've got a sales team that's really executing very effectively, and you want them to share, their techniques and their approaches with the rest of your sales organization. Hangouts makes it really easy to tap into that expertise and spread it throughout your organization with very little friction, and again across geographic and time zone boundaries. So one of my favorite examples around the field expertise and troubleshooting comes from Hudbay, which is a mining and exploration company. And in their example, they're developing a new site down in Peru that they've mapped out a detailed plan that expects production sort of later this year. And what happened with them was that a drilling rig failed, and they don't know what the cause is. And there's a clear cost of inactivity and impact of this drilling rig being down. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. So in the old world, they would have to literally fly someone down from their headquarters office to Peru. That person would document the problem with text and photos. Then that person would head back to a location where they could upload and share, the photos, and then schedule a meeting with both their representatives as well as any other experts to try to solve the problem. Now, in the new process, of course, the team that's on site when this failure occurs can take their handheld device directly to the source of the problem, start a Hangout with the experts back at the headquarters office. The experts can bring in the rig manufacturer representatives, and everybody can sort of see the problem in real time and be able to diagnose, order any necessary parts, and identify a repair plan in hours compared to what would have been days or longer in the previous process. So they're able to get the rig back online twice as fast. They're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're lowering the overall investor risk in this project. So the last area that we just want to talk about in terms of value is reaching customers. And again, we put that in quotes because customers can be a wide range of things. It can be internal groups within your organization. It could be external parties such as clients or vendors, etc. And there's something significant that comes from building trust within any of these communications. And what we're experiencing at Google, and again, hopefully some of you guys are in your organizations, is, the use of Hangouts, I think, accelerates the speed to trust, in part because, you can see people's body language and their facial expressions. You can see a little bit of the environment that they're in and the context that they're in when they're meeting with you right now. When you have that automatic switching of the camera to the person who's talking in the Hangout, you don't have this situation that you have on conference calls where you're like, oh, this is Adam and I have a question, right? You just know who it is because it immediately switches there. So, trust is a very intangible thing, but there are very significant benefits that Hangouts allow you to sort of accelerate the development of trust, which is especially true, with external constituents. So if you're talking, if your sales teams are doing account reviews with the clients, marketing teams dealing with external design agencies. We're also seeing, I think, a great use for reaching internal teams, whether it's the entire company with a town hall meeting or whether it's individual project teams that are working together. There's just, I think, a really great ability to reach people on the Hangout platform in a way that's much more agile, does allow you to scale very, very effectively, and of course is a great opportunity for value. So one of the examples of that comes from Rent-A-Kill, which is a very large, primarily European facilities maintenance and service outsourcer. And in their situation, the business is actually expanding very, very quickly. And one of the things that sets them apart from their competitors is a very high-quality, consistent delivery of these services. And so as they expand through acquisition and through organic growth, keeping all of those people at that same high level of training and expertise to deliver the services is very important. In the old world, they had a team that would travel from site to site, or in fact would travel to a region, stay in a hotel, then people from the different facilities in that region would come to that hotel location. And of course this had very high cost and limited scalability. There were only so many places they could travel to. So with Hangouts, they've been able to form a central core training location and staff, and then able to schedule the meetings with the remote staff. So dramatic reduction in travel time and travel costs, and allowing them to scale up and really keep pace with the growth, making sure that every new employee gets trained as rapidly as possible and is capable of delivering that differentiating level of service to their end customers. So 75% reduction in travel costs and time, and this ability to not only do the scheduled ones, but also to be reactive and set up ad hoc trainings when people need refreshers or when there's new stuff that's coming out, in a rapid fire fashion. So just a little bit of summarization on the cost reduction side. Obviously, not having to build out all this infrastructure, and in fact making it available to all users, is a huge benefit, right? Not having to deal with licenses of yet another product, whether it's in an existing suite or a standalone product. Dramatic reduction in travel expenses, tons of opportunity in many different examples to achieve that. And ultimately, this, I think, helps support a BYOD strategy, right? It allows us to try to create a corporate culture for our end customers where, we say, absolutely, you want to bring your own device, do it. We're going to help you use it safely and securely. And now we can use that as a very powerful communication tool to the employees using the Hangout platform. So low overhead, obviously these are very mobile-enabled tools for all the people in the organization, very easy to scale and manage for IT. A foundation block for this social collaboration capabilities together with Google Plus and Drive and Docs. Hangouts represents, I think, a major pillar in that. And then this unified communication. So of course we're talking here very much about the video Hangout piece, but as you all know, the Hangout piece includes the instant messages and sort of audio type interactions, and unified very tightly within the Gmail inbox, as well as the Google Plus pages that you can enter from, and the calendar too now starting to roll out. So I think some really significant benefits here, and hopefully these examples and some of these ways to frame the value will help you communicate to your customer organizations how to start thinking about this, right? And how to start thinking about how they can really transform the way they communicate and collaborate using Hangouts, and ultimately have a significant impact on the main goal of their business, whatever that may be. Now, in order to do that, they need to understand, and you need to understand, how to sort of get it implemented and what some of the requirements are. And to talk about that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Wynn.
Thank you very much, Adam. So good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be. My name is Patrick Wynn. I cover the Hangouts enterprise strategy within the Google Apps Suite. So what I wanted to do is just spend a couple of minutes going through, just as Adam mentioned, the technical requirements, but also the aspects related to change management that help drive user adoption. So I'm going to run through this a little bit quickly. It's meant to just be more of an overview. We have more information that we'll make available to all of you through the various sort of channels that we have for distributing that. But I just wanted to sort of touch on these because I think it is important. Just as one other update, there is a Q&A app on the right-hand side. So please go ahead and submit questions. I see some of you have already, submit questions and vote others up if you agree with those particular items. So one thing I wanted to cover is that the ultimate goal of Hangouts within Google Apps is for it to be the way to communicate while at work, right? So for anyone who's, especially on the apps platform right now, it should be the sort of knee-jerk mechanism by which people then communicate with others at work. There are obviously other media to use for certain circumstances, but we fully believe that there's no reason why it shouldn't be the place to go for communication. So to make that happen, we wanted to make sure it's automatic and real time for users so they can connect with each other and stay focused on the content, like Adam said, and not the tool. So this means it's important to think about how this is enabled and what is required for a good experience, right, for end users. So if we look at the makeup of the Hangouts platform in general, it's actually including two particular products underneath. So there's a Hangouts brand overall, but in reality there's Hangouts Chat that you see on the left-hand side, and then there's also Hangouts Video Calls that you see on the right. Hangouts Chat is the replacement for Google Talk. It's been built from the ground up to work in the same way as Google Video Calls, and that is to really take advantage of the way people are working in a modern world and not in this sort of historic world where people were sort of doing one-to-one instant message communication. So what we really mean by that is we know right now that people are typically using more than one device at work. Statistics show that it's about three devices per knowledge worker. And what we really want to focus on is being able to seamlessly move between devices, right? So if I'm starting an IM at work, I want to be able to jump on the subway, then get off and go home and maybe continue that conversation on my phone. I should be able to see where I left off in that discussion. I should jump back into the conversation. The other participants don't necessarily need to know that I've actually switched locations or devices. The same applies to video, right? You should be able to jump back into a video discussion that you've just left and seamlessly sort of rejoin maybe from other devices. So that's really the heart of why we've redesigned Hangouts from the ground up, both on the video and the chat side. But the only thing I want to reiterate here is that often customers may be confused by the Hangouts Chat versus the Hangouts Video Call side of things. So let's jump into the different points of access for these. So if you look at Hangouts overall, there's about, sort of covered here are the sort of main methods for people to access the service. And that includes various different devices. And at the bottom you can see that there are also some connection points from other systems. The main point here is that when we're talking about computers, we're really referring to just the browser. And then the browser case, what we really need is obviously webcam, speaker, mic for that particular device. And then also the Hangouts plugin. So right now, if you're using any of the more modern browsers, that will work with Hangouts, but you need to make sure that you have the Hangouts plugin installed. That is a one-time action that a user goes through when they first join a Hangout, but it's important to be aware of that and to make sure you've tested that process in a working environment just because of usual operating system variables and so on in that environment. The other point about tablets and smartphones is the two main platforms that we support are iOS and Android. So those are the more recent versions of either. Those details are available online. And those particular devices, we only support access through the Hangouts app. So that app is available for download by anybody from the Play Store or the App Store. I'll dig into some of the details regarding legacy VC and phones and so on, and obviously Chromebox for meetings, but just wanted to sort of paint the picture of the overall landscape with which people can connect to Hangouts from different devices. So if we look at moving on from the device requirements and then on into the actual software requirements or product requirements, there's different forms of Hangouts that you can use with varying levels of dependencies. So at the very base level, Hangouts chat only requires one to enable talk or the Hangout setting, what's actually referred to as the new Hangout setting in the admin panel. And then that allows people to engage in the usual instant messaging interaction online. If with that setting in place, then users can also engage in one-to-one video communication. So it's a sort of cut-down version of Hangouts, if you will, that users can also take advantage of. Once Google Plus is enabled, that then opens up Hangouts to allow multiple participants into a Hangout call. So that includes up to 15 different participants. Google Plus, in turn, has its own dependencies on, and they're listed here. So if you look at things like Drive, Picasso Web Albums, and so on, those are requirements of Plus. So it's important to be aware that those things are in scope if Hangouts video calls in their sort of ideal form are also in scope. The last piece about this is that Google Plus premium features are also required to be enabled for the named Hangout calls, but we can get into that a little bit later on. So if we move from the product side into the networking side, a very common question that comes up from customers is the amount of bandwidth or the shock, if you will, for launching Hangouts within any organization. So the most important point here is to really just understand not only how often people engage in Hangouts on a typical day, and a good indicator of that is looking at the usage of calendar meetings and you know, where the peaks are and where the different choke points are for bandwidth during the day. But within that, looks like I'm getting another call here. Within that, you also have to consider the bandwidth for those users when they're at work. So this isn't just about the time of day, but also the maximum amount of bandwidth for the different types of meetings they're having. So in a nutshell, this is all listed online as well. But in a nutshell, for a very basic call for audio only, you're looking at about 50 to 100 megabit, or sorry, 50 to 100 kilobits per second downstream and upstream bandwidth requirement. And then if you're getting into video conversation, it starts at about, for an ideal situation, is 1 megabits per second upstream, and then 4 megabits per second downstream for a typical sort of conference size. It grows and shrinks from there, as you can see in the next section below, but depending on the meeting size, and that is a linear path. Right? And the other point behind this is that latency is also critical for a good experience. So bandwidth is often the first thing people think about, but latency is important to even consider whether something is going to be worthwhile for users. That will affect audio and video. It doesn't matter how much bandwidth is being used. So we recommend checking latency to Google. That's the primary connection point for anyone on a Hangout. And ideally, it should be really around the sort of 30 milliseconds mark for round trip time. Anything below 100 milliseconds should be okay. So carrying on the networking side, it's important to consider also how users connect to Google and what that implies when they're typically working, say, in an office environment. This is all very easy and smooth for people working from home or in a coffee shop, where most connections, frankly, are just simple and straightforward. But in a working environment, there's more to it. So it's important to consider that these are the different methods, and it's in order of preference by the Hangouts endpoints to connect to Google. But it's important to check that these methods are open for users when they're connecting to Google. The other point behind this is that when customers are thinking about throttling and managing their network capacity with, in respect to other systems, this is also a key component that they can refer to when sort of designing that architecture, right? So that may come into play where you have more limited bandwidth available. Some other points to note is that because the Hangouts, at least endpoints, use a plugin, the plugin is effectively managing its own connections separate from the browser. So that means that ultimately, the full set of proxy configurations is not supported. Hangouts does work through certain proxy setups. I'm not going to go through them in detail now, But the point I'm getting at here is it is important to test these configurations, and also test the really popular today, and also test the certificates that users are using. So just make sure you're sort of testing these items so you can get ahead of this before deploying Hangouts. Security is another point that comes up commonly, and I think it's probably got a little bit less attention perhaps than some of the other aspects of apps where you have a lot of data that's being stored. The key components around security here are who has access to the conversation that's happening within any Hangout, and then also how can I control the access to a Hangout. So largely the simple rule is this: for users that are inside the same apps environment or the same apps domain, they will be treated differently than participants that are external from the domain, right? So if you, especially in the case of named Hangouts, this becomes very clear. Anyone within a domain can join any other Hangout if they know the name. If you want to hide that from other users, simply make the name more obscure. Calendar handles this very well because the calendar event can be marked private, in which case the details of the actual Hangout link are then also private to whomever may want to find out. External guests can only join a Hangout if they've been specifically invited either through the calendar invite or through the Hangout itself. That means that that actual participant ID must be the one that's joining the Hangout. They cannot forward that invite to someone else and that other person joins. Lastly, the security that's involved with when running a Hangout is that it's entirely over SSL. So the web, if you look at the web sort of furniture or structure around the Hangout UI, that is over SSL just like any other part of apps. And then the actual streams involved for the discussion are also encrypted directly with Google. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'll go over it a little bit more in detail here. It's important to make sure that the ultimate experience for users is to have this named Hangouts video calls functionality running. And that's starting at the bottom of this slide. So in order to get that running, you must enable Google Plus Premium features. So the Google Plus Premium features effectively enable a bunch of other controls, but they also unlock the ability for Hangouts to turn from sort of these difficult to share links into what's effectively called named Hangouts, right? So that adds a name to every single meeting. And that is important because it makes it really, really simple and smooth for other users to join within any organization, but it's also critical for the easy use of Chromebox for Meetings units. So I would rate that as sort of the goal for any organization to get to. Behind that is also the need for Google Plus for multi-way Hangouts, as I explained earlier, and then at the very sort of minimal set is the Hangouts chat functionality, which doesn't require Google Plus. So if I talk a little bit just now about a Chromebox for Meetings, this adds a few extra steps in order to get started with this. It is explained whenever a Chromebox for Meetings device is purchased. You receive all these instructions, but I just want to make sure everyone's aware of what's important about rolling out these devices. The point behind these units is that we really see the vision as every single meeting room should have a Chromebox for Meetings unit in it, so that users don't have to think about whether or not they're going to jump into a Hangout within a meeting room. They can do that on the fly. It's not a thought process. It's just, if you're having a meeting, a Hangout should definitely be a component of that where it makes sense. So for enrollment, basically you just need an account on that domain to enroll that device on that domain. Once you purchase the device, you get a license. That license is then consumed by that device once it's enrolled. The calendar setup and the device naming require administrator accounts. So frankly, you just go into the admin panel and you can associate the name of the device with one that's listed in the admin panel for easy identification. And then you can also associate devices with calendar resources. This is probably the most critical step in launching Chromebox for Meetings units for the really full benefit of rolling the units out. What you get when you do this is when the units are sitting in a meeting room, anyone who walks into that meeting room can see immediately the schedule of the meeting room. They see private links for meetings that are obviously marked private, but it means that it's literally a one-click action for them to start any Hangout within that room, and that's a much simpler approach than most other options available today. The other point to mention here as a footnote is that SSO is not supported when connecting as an administrator account or for the account with on the device when setting up enrollment. So you need to authenticate directly with Google. So just while we're on the topic of Chromebox for meetings and how that works in meeting rooms and so on, it's important to consider how to connect with legacy environments. So at a very high level, we'll go through this, the key options that are available. So earlier this year, actually in combination with the announcement of Chromebox for meetings, we also announced a partnership with Video where they allow you to connect legacy environments, specifically ones that are running on H323 or SIP-based systems, to Hangouts. What happens there is that those systems, once they're in contact with the video gateway that's installed as part of either on-premise or their hosted solution, those other quote-unquote legacy systems can then connect to Hangouts by using a sort of translation mechanism between the Hangout name and that legacy endpoint. So it means that the meeting still is originated in Hangouts, but the users on those legacy environments will then connect to the Hangouts call. The main benefit here is that Chromebox for meetings is designed for sort of smaller huddle rooms at the moment. It doesn't cover auditoriums and other venues like that, so you still need a way to get those connected to Hangouts where it makes sense. So this is a great solution for handling that case. The other point to mention is that often when you're having a Hangout, you want to include dialing in from a phone, or PSTN in as people refer to it. We launched a partnership with Uber Conference that allows one to do this directly within the Hangout UI. Once you enable Uber Conference, you can basically have almost like a permanent number associated with any Hangout that you have. And that allows people to dial into your Hangout as well as connecting to the Hangout directly. You can see a preview of that UI here. There's the Uber Conference UI on the right-hand side for managing audio participants, and then the usual Hangout UI on the left for managing the video participants. Incidentally, this also helps increase the number of people you can have in a live discussion on a Hangout. With Uber Conference, you can get up to, say, like 100 people or something like that into that discussion. So that's sort of the technical side. I hope that sort of has driven some curiosity so that we can get into some Q&A and so on around that. The other point I think is really important, especially from an adoption perspective, is to look at the change management side of things. So the reason this is important, not only for new customers, actually in the context of Hangouts, change management is important just for driving adoption. You get certain usage from organically exposing Hangouts to users, but we see a much greater adoption curve when a real concerted change management approach is embarked upon within any organization. So what we're looking at with Hangouts is a very different way for having meetings, right? Meetings don't happen the way people are used to. So you can think of a number of areas where this is different. In one part, if you're using Chromebox for meetings, there are no cables, right? So you're not going to be presenting through a video cable. You're going to connect via another Hangout endpoint, namely your laptop. The other side of this is that it should be automatic and it should be simple. So those links in Calendar to join a meeting quickly, the named calls within meetings, makes the process very, very different, and it's a lot smoother when everyone understands how that change impacts the running of meetings all together at once. So if you're looking at the way Hangouts works now in the complete picture, especially if you include Chromebox for meetings, you now have really very few excuses for people to not jump into a meeting from whatever device they may happen to have. So it's not the case of, oh, we're having a video meeting, let's make sure that we're connecting with someone else. It's more the case of, well, we should be able to get anybody into this discussion at any point in time as long as they're available. It doesn't matter where they are or on what device they're running on. So that change is important to consider in how any organization approaches Hangouts with respect to meetings. So I'm just going to go through these very quickly, but there are basically 5 things to really focus on when looking at change management for Hangouts. This applies both to Chromebox for meetings, often you'll see that listed here as CFM, as well as it does to Hangouts on its own, even without CFM units. So quickly, if we run through this, it's important to make sure that calendars are understood by end users. So the main difference here is that you have a video call link in calendars, and that's makes it a one-click action for anyone to join a meeting, whether they're at in a meeting room, at a device, wherever they may be. It should be simple and straightforward for everyone to get into the same meeting. Those meetings are also using named calls, right? So you can see here in the screenshot, maybe it's a little small, but those named calls are important for making it simple for other people to join that weren't necessarily originally invited. The other point is, if you're rolling out Chromebox for meetings, it's important to understand exactly how those work in a meeting room, right? So think about the user who walks into that meeting room and what they expect to be able to do and how that unit actually works. We need to make sure it's simple and easy to use, but explaining just exactly what that initial calendar view looks like and where that information came from is important to make sure meetings go smoothly. The next point to consider, without making it too obvious here, is that joining meetings from a laptop or your desktop, wherever that may be, is important to understand from the different entry points that people may make. So they may be coming in via calendar, or they may be coming in from Gmail invite. Those are the sort of two typical ways that people will invite other individuals. But actually, importantly now, with this concept of named meetings, it may just be that the name is sent to another participant via instant message or just shouted across the room. And being aware of how to join those names quickly is important. This is different when you're joining from a laptop in a meeting room, for example. In that case, you actually use a different URL to avoid things like feedback and so on, and that's the g.co/present/meeting name. That makes it much simpler and quicker for users to start presenting from their desktop. So the other point behind this is, and I'll get into that in a minute, but the other point is that users should also be aware that they can join from their mobile devices. This, again, it makes it all smoother and easier for people to get started in meetings if they know what is possible and they know which devices are supported. So, without going into this over and over again, it's important to consider that mobile devices, especially in bring your own device environments, should be considered as part of that plan. Lastly, I mentioned the g.co/present. This is specific for Chromebox for meetings environments, or anywhere where people are having a hangout with more than one participant in the same room. You really only want one person joining the hangout with AV capabilities, and then everybody else maybe contributing through a screen share, as you can see here. So once you've considered change management, you can see that this, just as a side note, this follows a lot of the same process we use for Google Apps deployments, perhaps in a sort of more minimal sense. But it's also important to really measure the success. What are you trying to get out of that deployment? There are methods, for example, of measuring how many minutes people are spending in Hangouts within an environment. You can get those details from the Hangouts Google Plus APIs for reporting. You also want to measure, user satisfaction and, maybe the reduction in other methods that people are using to meet. So it could be travel. It could actually be in a simple conference call. A conference call, actually, for a lot of participants, can cost quite a bit of money. So consider those elements when looking at what the goals are and then measuring the success against those goals. And, it's probably obvious and a normal part of any change management program for anyone who's used to doing change management with apps. Executive sponsorship is key, right? So it could be something simple as you have someone at an exec level who puts out a Google Plus post saying, hey, if you want a meeting with me, it's going to be over Hangout. Otherwise, you're going to have to take into account, me getting to your meeting and getting from it, and it's going to be harder to schedule. So little things like that go a long way in helping really communicate and spread the word. And on that note, I just want to really dip briefly into an aspect of communications. So when as you're well aware, if anyone, you're all familiar with rolling out apps in other organizations, communications is a key part of this. So with that, it's important to actually develop a communications plan for Hangouts. It's, I would say, probably unwise to just think that once Hangouts is enabled, people will discover it and it'll just sort of grow on its own. That is certainly true, but to really get towards the goals, you have to think about your entire communications plans for this service in its own right. So understanding exactly the user makeup of the organization, how that organization operates, and then developing a plan that makes sense is the best way to go forward. And really this, again, pulls a lot from the process that's involved with Google Apps, but it could be at a simpler, lighter weight level. So simple things like, prominent signage and posters, advocating which rooms, are already ready to go with Chromebox for Meetings units, and then also explaining why. Why is using Hangouts better for the organization and better for the running of the company as a whole? That may not be immediately apparent to most users. And then in the same light of communications is obviously the training side of things. So while we want Hangouts to be simple and easy for people to use, there are, you have a variety of different types of individuals within any organization. Any of you who have gone through the change management process know this is not to be taken lightly. So training is still key, and especially when you think of some of the interesting different concepts behind Hangouts, it's worth considering training. So we have a lot more information about all of the slides that we've shown here, and especially around the training side. But at a very high level, really you want to first understand exactly the user base that's involved here. How do they normally engage in meetings? What kinds of meetings do they have? How often are they? Are they with lots of other people that are in the same building? Are those people remote? What normal media do they use to use? What are the sort of switch, the basic sort of switches that users are going to be making to Hangouts in those cases? And then developing a training plan that goes along with that. All those usual things apply, like finding the people that would really benefit from white glove treatment. That could be executive level, the administrators for executives, and so on. And it could also be people who are used to modus operandi with other tools, and this is a real change of working behavior. So long story short, definitely create a training plan that makes sense for users, and don't take this too lightly when really your goal is to drive up much more adoption of Hangouts within any company where it's being deployed. So with that, I want to leave some time to sort of get through some questions here. I know some have come in. Happy to jump in. I think it's more important to really make this interactive.